Hans from Sitka, Alaska. Recently, I watched back one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time, the 1996 Survivor Series. The Madison Square Garden crowd was super into Sid that night and very much anti-HBK. My cousin was in the crowd live and said the place blew up when Sid won the title, and you could feel it when the referee counted 3. Could you consider the 96 Survivor Series as the planting of the seeds for the Attitude Era? Between what I remember as one of the first rebellious crowds or smart crowds, the ovation for Sid, the boos for Shawn Michaels, The Rock's debut, Austin's first big match with Brett, and The Undertaker debuting a new look, it was a pivotal night for WWE. Yeah, Undertaker's new look sucked. Let's just get that out of the way first. He comes down looking like fucking Batman. He's got the fucking the teardrop on his face. Yeah, that version of that look for The Undertaker I always thought sucked. I think 1996 in general set the stage for what would become the Attitude Era. You started to see the rise of names like Austin. Rock had just debuted. He wasn't even The Rock yet. Mankind, he had just debuted after WrestleMania that year. And you started to see changes that other stars were going through, like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. Although a lot of that came really into 97. There's really no definitive moment that kicked off the Attitude Era. Like you said, it was more like seeds that were planted along the way here and there. The Austin 3:16 speech at the King of the Ring in 96 being one of them. It did not lead to an immediate push for Steve Austin. He wasn't even on the main card for SummerSlam 2 months after that. But boy, people look back on that Austin 3:16 speech as this pivotal moment. It certainly was the first real sign of attitude that we got in that company. I mean, the first real sign of what I would consider attitude, and I'm not pointing it out as like the kickoff of the Attitude Era, but actually, technically, it goes back to the end of 95, when Diesel lost the title to Bret Hart, and he went heel. But only heel on people who weren't wearing a black glove. Remember, he came out on Raw that next night and he cut that promo. I think he wasn't even in the ring. He was being interviewed, I think, by Vince standing in front of the announce desk, outside the ring. And he just cut this promo and he basically said, if you're with me, I'll be here for you. And when he would come out, he would smack hands with anybody wearing a black Diesel glove. And if anybody wasn't, he didn't give a shit about you. He really was. He was Big Daddy Cool at that point. He was like the cool heel. Now imagine if that version of Diesel was the champion. He might have had a more successful run in 95. That to me was like the first real sign of attitude, or somebody having an attitude in that company. But it didn't last very long. He was gone a few months later. But fast forward, like I said, Austin 3:16, that was a seed being planted. The Stone Cold Brian Pillman gun incident on Raw, that was an attitude moment. That was in the fall of 96. The fans at MSG reacting the way they did, smart fans at Madison Square Garden that night. That was another sign of things to come. Bret Hart snapping on Raw before WrestleMania 13 and going on that cuss tirade. That's one of the biggest moments I point to when it comes to the birth of attitude. But I also think you need to look at the first episode of Raw's War earlier that same month. That to me is maybe the moment I would point to when things really felt like they were changing. The show had a different look. It had a different feel to it. They have the ramp now and the giant Titantron. And that's the look that we've basically had different versions of it, but it's basically maintained the same freaking look since 1997. It really hasn't changed all that radically. Now it's HD, they have the LED boards and everything, but that basic look of the giant Titantron, and now maybe it's a smaller ramp if they have one. It's amazing to think that in 26 years or whatever it's been, that look really hasn't changed. But to answer your question, yes, that Survivor Series, I think it planted some seeds. But honestly, I would tell you, especially if you're a newer fan or, maybe you just weren't watching at the time, the entire fall of 1996, that's really where you could see the Attitude Era first starting. Everybody was pissed off about something, and it was all centered around the championship. The championship back when they only had one and they didn't muck it up with multiple ones, that Winged Eagle was the most important thing in the world. So Brett still had issues with Shawn. Shawn didn't like Brett. Undertaker didn't like either one of them. You had Sid in there. Then Vader became involved, and everybody was just inherently pissed off at all times. That, to me, was the real birth right there. That period was the real birth of the Attitude Era.